Allen Iverson was 17 years old when the judge looked down from the bench and sentenced him to 15 years in prison for a crime he swore he didn't commit. It was February 14th, 1993, Valentine's Day. But there was no love in that Hampton, Virginia courtroom. Just a young black man facing a lifetime behind bars and a dream of playing professional basketball that seemed to die with the bang of the gavel. 15 years in state prison, the judge announced as Allen's mother, Ann Iverson, collapsed in tears behind him. The courtroom erupted, cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, and a 17-year-old kid who'd been destined for greatness watched his future disappear in an instant. But this isn't a story about a dream that died. This is a story about a dream that refused to die, no matter what the system threw at it. Before we dive into one of the most controversial and inspiring stories in sports history, make sure to hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about Allen Iverson, justice in America, and what it really means to fight for your dreams when the whole world is against you. February 4th, 1993. Circle Lanes. Bowling alley in Hampton, Virginia. What started as teenagers having fun on a winter night became a racial incident that would dominate headlines for months and threaten to destroy the career of one of the most talented athletes America had ever seen. Allen Iverson wasn't just any 17-year-old. He was the best high school football and basketball player in Virginia, maybe in the entire country. College scouts had been calling his house since he was 15. He was 5'11", 165 pounds of pure athleticism, with speed that made grown men shake their heads in disbelief and a competitive fire that burned hotter than anything coaches had ever seen. But on that February night, none of that mattered, because Allen Iverson was about to become the center of a storm that would test everything he believed about America, justice, and his own future. Hampton, Virginia, in the early 1990s was a city divided. Not officially, not legally, but in all the ways that really mattered. The white side of town had the nice houses, the good schools, the opportunities. The black side of town had Allen Iverson, growing up in the East End projects where crack cocaine had devastated families and gunshots were as common as car horns. Allen's father had been in and out of his life since birth, leaving Ann Iverson to raise 4 children on a hairdresser's salary in one of the toughest neighborhoods in Virginia. But Ann wasn't just any single mother. She was a fighter, a survivor, a woman who refused to let her circumstances define her children's futures. "You're special, baby," she would tell Allen every morning before school. "Don't let anybody tell you different." Allen was special, and everybody knew it. At Bethel High School, he was a football quarterback who could throw 60-yard bombs and outrun college-bound seniors. But basketball was his first love, where his crossover dribble was already becoming legendary, and his fearless drives to the basket left bigger, stronger players on the floor wondering what had just happened. By his junior year, Allen was being recruited by every major college in America. Duke, North Carolina, Georgetown. They all wanted the kid from the projects who played like his life depended on every possession. Because it did. February 4th, 1993, started like any other winter night for Allen Iverson and his friends. School was out. It was too cold for outdoor basketball, so they decided to go bowling at Circle Lanes, one of the few places in Hampton where black and white teenagers sometimes crossed paths. Allen walked into that bowling alley with 4 friends, all black, all from the East End. They rented shoes, got a lane, and started what should have been a fun night out. But within an hour, fun had turned into fear, and fear had turned into chaos. The trouble started with words. A group of white teenagers, some of them football players from rival high schools, began making comments. Not loud enough for everyone to hear, but loud enough for Allen and his friends to understand the message. "You don't belong here." Allen had heard it before. Growing up black in Virginia, you learned to navigate these situations carefully. Sometimes you walked away. Sometimes you stood your ground. Sometimes the situation made the choice for you. That night, the situation chose violence. What happened next depends on who you ask. The white teenagers said Allen and his friends attacked them with chairs, bottles, and fists in an unprovoked assault. Allen and his friends said they were defending themselves after being attacked first, after being called names no teenager should have to hear, after being told to go back where they came from. The only thing everyone agreed on was that a massive brawl broke out, involving dozens of teenagers, chairs flying through the air, and chaos that lasted several terrifying minutes before police arrived. When the police arrived at Circle Lanes, they saw what they expected to see: a fight between black and white teenagers in a city already tense with racial divisions. But instead of investigating carefully, instead of interviewing all witnesses, instead of looking for the truth, they made a decision that would haunt Hampton for years. They arrested only the black teenagers. Allen Iverson, along with 3 friends, was handcuffed and taken to jail while the white teenagers were allowed to go home. No questions asked, no investigation needed. The assumption was clear. The black kids started it. The black kids were guilty. Case closed. The local media ran with the story. Basketball star arrested in racial brawl. Violence at local bowling alley. Allen Iverson charged with assault. The narrative was set before anyone had examined the evidence, before anyone had listened to all the witnesses, before anyone had asked the most important question: what really happened? For Allen, sitting in a jail cell at 17 years old, watching his name dragged through newspapers and television reports, the lesson was brutal and clear. Being talented, being special, being destined for greatness meant nothing if you were black in Virginia and the system decided you were guilty. But Ann Iverson wasn't about to let her son become another casualty of a system designed to fail young black men. The trial of Allen Iverson became a media circus. Television trucks lined the streets outside the courthouse. Reporters from major networks descended on Hampton. The case had everything: race, sports, violence, and a teenager whose future hung in the balance. The prosecution painted Allen as a thug who had used his athletic ability to intimidate and assault innocent white teenagers. They brought in witnesses who claimed Allen had thrown chairs, started fights, and shown no remorse for his actions. They argued that being a star athlete didn't give him the right to commit crimes. The defense told a different story. They brought in witnesses who said the white teenagers had started the fight with racial slurs and the first thrown punch. They argued that Allen and his friends were defending themselves, that they were outnumbered, that they had been targeted because of their race. But in 1993, Virginia, with a predominantly white jury, the outcome felt predetermined. On March 5, 1993, Allen Iverson was found guilty of maiming by mob, a felony that carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. The judge gave him 15 years. 15 years for a 17-year-old whose only crime might have been being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong skin color. 15 years that would take him from teenager to middle age, from high school to a life behind bars, from basketball courts to prison yards. Allen's mother sobbed. His lawyers promised to appeal. His coaches shook their heads in disbelief. And Allen Iverson, 17 years old and facing a lifetime in prison, made a promise that would define the rest of his life. I'm innocent and I'm gonna prove it. While Allen sat in jail awaiting the start of his prison sentence, something remarkable was happening outside those walls. The case had caught the attention of people who mattered, people with power, people who believed that justice had not been served. Governor Doug Wilder, Virginia's first black governor, began reviewing the case. He saw the inconsistencies in witness testimony, the rush to judgment, the atmosphere of racial tension that had poisoned the entire process. After months of investigation, Governor Wilder made a decision that shocked Virginia. He granted Allen Iverson conditional clemency. The conditions were strict. Allen would serve 4 months in jail, then be released on good behavior. He could finish high school, but he was on probation for years. Any violation, any trouble, any mistake, and he would serve the full 15-year sentence. It was a second chance, but barely. Allen was still a convicted felon. College recruiters stopped calling. Scholarship offers disappeared. The future that had seemed so bright just months earlier was now clouded with uncertainty and doubt. That's when John Thompson stepped in. Coach Thompson was the legendary basketball coach at Georgetown University, a man who had built his program on taking chances on players other schools wouldn't touch. He had coached Patrick Ewing to a national championship. He had sent dozens of players to the NBA, and he had a reputation for caring more about his players as people than as athletes. When Thompson called Iverson and offered Allen a full scholarship to Georgetown, it wasn't just a basketball opportunity, it was a lifeline. Allen Iverson arrived at Georgetown University in the fall of 1994, carrying more baggage than any 18-year-old should have to bear. He was a convicted felon on probation. He was damaged goods in the eyes of many. He was a reminder of everything wrong with the criminal justice system to others. But to Coach John Thompson, Allen was exactly what he appeared to be, a kid who had been failed by the system and deserved a chance to prove who he really was. Georgetown wasn't just any basketball program. It was a place where young black men learned to carry themselves with dignity, to speak with intelligence, to understand that they represented something bigger than themselves. Coach Thompson didn't just coach basketball, he coached life. "I don't care what happened in Hampton," Thompson told Allen during their first meeting. "I care about what happens here. You show me who you are on this court and in this classroom, and I'll show you how to get to where you want to go." For the first time since that night at the bowling alley, Allen felt like someone believed in him not despite his past, but because of his potential. Allen's freshman year at Georgetown was a revelation. The kid who had been written off as a thug proved to be one of the most electrifying players college basketball had ever seen. At 6 feet tall and 165 pounds, he was too small to dominate physically, so he dominated with speed, skill, and a fearlessness that left opponents and spectators speechless. His crossover dribble became legendary on college campuses. His ability to score against bigger, stronger players defied basketball logic. His leadership on the court reminded everyone why he had been considered the best player in Virginia before his world fell apart. By his sophomore year, Allen Iverson had become the most exciting player in college basketball. Georgetown games were must-see television. Allen's jersey became the best-selling college basketball jersey in America. Suddenly, the kid from the projects who had been facing 15 years in prison was being called the future of basketball. But Allen never forgot where he came from or what had happened to him. Every game, every possession, every shot was fueled by the memory of sitting in that courtroom, hearing that judge sentence him to 15 years. Watching his mother cry as his future seemed to disappear. "I play angry," Allen would later say. "Not angry at basketball, not angry at my teammates, but angry at a system that tried to destroy me before I had a chance to show who I really was." That anger translated into the most dynamic college basketball career anyone had seen since Michael Jordan. Allen averaged over 20 points per game both seasons at Georgetown. He led the Hoyas to the Elite Eight. He was named Big East Player of the Year. NBA scouts who had written him off after the Hampton incident were now calling him a lottery pick. After 2 years at Georgetown, Allen faced a decision that would define the rest of his life: stay in college and continue his education, or enter the NBA draft and pursue his professional dreams. The choice was complicated by his family's financial situation. Ann Iverson was still working as a hairdresser, still struggling to pay bills, still sacrificing everything for her children. Allen could change his family's life forever with one decision. In April 1996, Allen Iverson declared for the NBA draft. June 26, 1996, NBA draft night at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Allen Iverson sat in the green room wearing a suit that cost more than his family's monthly rent, surrounded by other college stars who had never faced a felony conviction, never spent time in jail, never had their dreams nearly destroyed by a system designed to work against them. The Philadelphia 76ers had the first pick in the draft. They had been the worst team in the NBA the previous season, and they needed a player who could change their culture, their identity, their future. When Jerry Stackhouse was traded away just days before the draft, it became clear who that player would be. With the first pick in the 1996 NBA draft, Commissioner David Stern announced, "The Philadelphia 76ers select Allen Iverson from Georgetown University." The kid who had been sentenced to 15 years in prison was now the #1 pick in the NBA draft. The teenager who had been written off as a thug was now being hailed as the future of professional basketball. The young man who had been failed by the justice system was about to become a millionaire playing the game he loved. When Allen walked across that stage to shake Commissioner Stern's hand, he wasn't just fulfilling his own dream. He was proving that second chances matter, that the system doesn't always get it right, that sometimes the kids everyone gives up on are exactly the ones who change the world. 3 months later, a federal investigation would prove what Allen had been saying all along. He was innocent. The charges would be dropped. His conviction would be overturned. Justice, delayed but not denied, would finally arrive. But by then, Allen Iverson was already busy proving his innocence in a different court. Allen Iverson's rookie season in Philadelphia was unlike anything the NBA had ever seen. Here was a 6-foot, 165-pound guard going against players 6 feet 8 inches and 250 pounds. Not just competing, but dominating. His crossover dribble left future Hall of Famers stumbling. His fearless drives to the basket resulted in highlight reel finishes that defied physics. But Allen brought more than just basketball skills to the NBA. He brought a culture, an attitude, an authenticity that the league had never experienced. His cornrows, his tattoos, his baggy shorts, his hip-hop swagger. Everything about Allen Iverson challenged what the NBA thought a superstar should look like. Traditional fans were shocked. League executives were nervous. Older players were skeptical. But young fans, especially young black fans from the inner city, saw someone who looked like them, talked like them, and understood their struggles. Allen averaged 23.5 points per game his rookie year and won Rookie of the Year honors. But more importantly, he had changed the conversation about what an NBA superstar could be. He had proven that you didn't have to conform to succeed, that authenticity was more powerful than image, that being yourself was better than being what others expected you to be. "I'm not trying to be anybody but Allen Iverson," he told reporters. "If that's not good enough, then I guess it's not good enough. But I'm not changing for anybody." Philadelphia embraced him immediately. This was a blue-collar city that appreciated hard work, toughness, and realness. Allen Iverson was all three. By his second season, Allen had earned a nickname that would define his entire career: The Answer. The answer to Philadelphia's losing ways. The answer to basketball's biggest questions. The answer to what happens when talent meets determination meets a refusal to quit. Allen's game continued to evolve. He became not just a scorer, but a complete player. His passing improved. His leadership grew. His understanding of how to make teammates better expanded. But most importantly, his impact on the culture of basketball became undeniable. Young players across America started braiding their hair like Allen. They practiced his crossover dribble for hours. They wore their shorts longer and their attitudes prouder. Allen Iverson had given them permission to be themselves in a sport that had always demanded conformity. The 2000-1 season was Allen's masterpiece. He averaged 31.1 points per game, leading the league in scoring for the fourth time in 5 years. He was named NBA Most Valuable Player, becoming the shortest player ever to win the award. But individual accolades weren't enough. Allen wanted what had been denied to so many players like him: a championship. The Philadelphia 76ers reached the NBA Finals that year, facing the heavily favored Los Angeles Lakers, led by Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. The Lakers had gone 15-1 in the playoffs, destroying every team they faced. They were expected to sweep Philadelphia easily. Allen Iverson had other plans. Game 1 of the 2001 NBA Finals at the Staples Center in Los Angeles was supposed to be a Lakers showcase. Shaq was dominant. Kobe was unstoppable. The Lakers had home court advantage and were 15-1 in the playoffs. Philadelphia wasn't given much of a chance. But Allen Iverson had spent his entire life being underestimated, being written off, being told he wasn't good enough. One more time wasn't going to break him. Allen scored 48 points in Game 1, hitting impossible shots, making plays that defied logic, and leading Philadelphia to a stunning 107-101 victory. With less than a minute left and the game in hand, Allen hit a jump shot over Tyronn Lue, then stepped over him as he fell to the ground. That step over became iconic. It wasn't just Allen stepping over a defender. It was Allen stepping over everyone who had doubted him, everyone who had tried to destroy him, everyone who had said a kid from the projects could never reach the top of the basketball world. "That's for everybody who said I couldn't do it," Allen said after the game. "That's for Hampton, that's for Georgetown, that's for Philadelphia, that's for my mom. That's for proving that dreams don't die just because somebody tries to kill them." The Lakers would win the series in 5 games, but Allen's performance in Game 1 became legendary. He had proven that heart could compete with size, that determination could match talent, that sometimes the smallest player on the court could be the biggest star in the building. Allen Iverson's impact on basketball went far beyond statistics and wins. He changed how players looked, how they acted, how they expressed themselves. Before Allen, NBA players wore conservative clothes to games, kept their hair neat, and rarely showed personality. Allen changed all of that. His cornrows became a fashion statement copied by players across the league. His tattoos, once considered unprofessional, became a form of artistic expression embraced by a generation of athletes. His post-game press conferences, where he spoke honestly about his feelings and frustrations, changed how players interacted with media. But perhaps most importantly, Allen gave young black men permission to be themselves in a world that often demanded they change to fit in. He showed that success didn't require abandoning your culture, your style, or your authenticity. "Allen made it okay to be real," said one young player who grew up watching Iverson. "He showed us we didn't have to talk different or act different or dress different to be successful. We could just be ourselves." The NBA initially resisted Allen's influence. In 2005, the league instituted a dress code that many saw as a direct response to Allen's style. Players were required to wear business casual attire to games and league functions. The move was controversial, with many arguing it was racially motivated. Allen's response was perfect. I'm not going to change who I am for a dress code. If they want me to wear a suit, I'll wear a suit, but I'm still going to be Allen Iverson underneath it. In 2002, after a disappointing playoff loss, Allen Iverson held a press conference that would become the most quoted, most parodied, most memorable press conference in NBA history. Frustrated by questions about his practice habits, Allen unleashed a passionate defense that revealed everything about his approach to basketball and life. "We're talking about practice," Allen said, his voice rising with emotion. "Not a game, not a game, not a game. We talking about practice, not the game that I go out there and die for and play every game like it's my last. Not the game, but we're talking about practice, man." Critics heard laziness and unprofessionalism, but those who understood Allen heard something different. A man who had been fighting his entire life, who had given everything to basketball, who had overcome more than most people could imagine, being questioned about his commitment to a game he loved more than life itself. The practice rant became a cultural phenomenon, quoted in movies, referenced in songs, and parodied countless times. But for Allen, it was simply an honest expression of frustration from someone who had always worn his heart on his sleeve. "I don't practice to impress anybody," Allen later explained. "I practice to get better. I play games to win. When people question my commitment to this game, they're questioning everything I've fought for my entire life." Allen Iverson retired from the NBA in 2010 with a resume that spoke for itself. 11-time All-Star, 4-time scoring champion, 2001 MVP, and over 24,000 career points. But his statistical achievements, impressive as they were, only told part of his story. Allen's real legacy was cultural. He changed how basketball players could look, act, and express themselves. He showed that authenticity was more powerful than conformity, that being yourself was better than being what others expected you to be. In 2016, Allen Iverson was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. In his acceptance speech, he talked about the journey from that courtroom in Hampton to basketball immortality, from facing 15 years in prison to becoming one of the greatest players ever to play the game. "I want to thank everybody who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," Allen said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I want to thank my mother for never giving up on me. I want to thank Coach Thompson for seeing something in me that others couldn't see. And I want to thank basketball for giving me a way to prove that where you come from doesn't determine where you're going." Today, Allen Iverson's influence can be seen throughout the NBA. Players routinely express themselves through fashion, social media, and personal style in ways that were unthinkable before Allen broke down those barriers. The league that once tried to contain his influence has now embraced the authenticity he represented. But perhaps Allen's greatest achievement was showing young people, especially young black men, that they didn't have to choose between success and authenticity. They could be themselves and still reach the highest levels of achievement. They could face injustice and still triumph. They could be knocked down and still get back up. Allen Iverson proved that sometimes the answer isn't changing who you are to fit the world. Sometimes the answer is being exactly who you are and forcing the world to change around you. If this story inspired you to never apologize for being yourself, no matter what the world tells you, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their authenticity is their superpower. Remember, you don't have to change to succeed. You just have to refuse to quit.